So for the next presentation, we have my dear colleagues, Kathryn Vrhovnik and Karen Lawrence. They are both teachers in my our mathematics and statistics department. Kathryn is also business coordinator for our business math courses, and Karen is also our representative to and lead for the cause, which is I have it on the consortium for the advancement of statistical education. I now would like to invite you to come and take over.
See, this one work. I'll just use the arrow. It's fine. Okay, go back. Yeah, no, I'll just use it. Do I even need this? Can you hear me without it? Use it with? Okay, all right. Okay, that's good. So I'm actually surprised to see so many here because of the weather. It held off nicely for us, so that's good. So Karen and I are going to talk to you today about course development and how resources sort of play into that. But you'll notice the word quality is in there. When I started teaching about 16, 17 years ago, if you were to mention the word resources to me, I probably would have just thought of a textbook, maybe a calculator, maybe some software. But nowadays, to me anyway, and to a few of my colleagues, it means something different. Go ahead. So I'm curious, if you don't mind, if you have your phone, go to menti.com or scan the code. When you hear the word resources, what do you think? You should be able to put in a few different words. I've asked, as Miro did, some of my colleagues, some of my students, about 100 students, just in conversation. You know, what do you think of when you hear the word resources? And actually, a few students didn't know what I meant. They were like, do you mean materials? Sure. What do you think of relative to course? Now, I'm not going to, unfortunately, this won't link to the responses. So I'm going to look here, but I'm pretty confident I'm going to see what I saw from my students, if this will work. Of course not. You can go to the next one. Okay, so these are kind of what I pulled from the students and the faculty that I asked. Again, just off, in conversation. And it's just taking a minute to load. I'm pretty sure all of this is going to come up anyway from what everybody's suggesting, if this will load, which it won't. See, this is a resource that's not working right now. Anyways, I will try to get that to work. But in the meantime, I summarized basically what everybody said. And sure, textbook was there. Digital, print, depends on your preference primarily. OERs were also mentioned, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that came through, which is what Karen and I talk about when we develop a course. We don't develop a course based on a textbook. A textbook is part of the process, but there's way more to it than a textbook. Go ahead. So first and foremost, it requires us to think about multiple stakeholders. Obviously, the customer, one of which is the student, also the college or post-secondary that we work for, but there's many more to that. So again, when we develop our courses, we're not just looking at who's in front of us, what book do they need? It's a bigger picture than that. Go ahead. Why do we do this? Because a low quality course, as you may or may not have experienced, tends to cause some issues. Students don't come, they're low engaged, they don't do the homework, they don't do the assignments, poor outcomes, frustration. If you have multiple sections, there might be inconsistency across the sections. It can just cause a lot of extra work, sometimes some frustration. Go ahead. And bottom line is no longer, go ahead, do I think of it as needing a calculator, needing a textbook, and maybe some software. It's much bigger than that. Resources to us is much bigger than that. So when we try to develop a statistics course, and this could be applicable to a math course as well, these are kind of the four things that we start with. Obviously, the outcomes are important. What is the course outcomes of the course that you're teaching, which has been, put together by maybe you yourself or maybe some others? What is the pedagogy? For us, because we teach primarily statistics courses, we're looking at StatsEd and we're following the guidelines of GAISE. How about quality tools, which is what Karen's going to talk about, maybe new to some of you, maybe not. And lastly, reflection. So that's reflecting with our colleagues who possibly teach with us or have taught the course prior, and of course, talking to the students. So again, course development definitely has a textbook in mind, but for us, the word resource means much more. And now I'm going to turn it over to Karen. She's going to continue.
So in my past life, I'm actually an industrial quality engineer and quality manager. So most of my thinking when it comes to development, improving, and whatnot is process based, and pulling those tools from those times in industry have been quite helpful. So in working with Kathryn over the last few years, and in working with my students, because I still teach quite a bit of the quality content to mechanical engineering students, as well as a plethora of content across the statistics curriculum. I let them use some of the quality tools, and then I bring those quality tools into any process that we're trying to improve at the college. Reception is, well, it's a spectrum. But I have found a willing partner in Kathryn and some other folks on campus. So when we look at designing anything out there, whether it's a service or a product, and to me, a course, a program, a learning plan, an activity, or even if it's you've got to wing it today because the technology is not working, my mind automatically goes to a process that has just been honed in me. And one of the things up here, one of the tools that is very common these days comes from the platform of Lean Six Sigma, and it's called a CPOC diagram. And what it is just a high level understanding and get you to brainstorm out what your suppliers are. The inputs, the process itself. Now, this is just a list of process, because the idea of actually laying out a diagram of your process is a whole nother gamut here. So, and your outputs and your customers. And in many understanding, we actually do it backwards. We actually start from who are our customers and work back from there. So there is lots of literature out there in terms of education, and there's lots of debates, lots of camps. People put up their walls around their, fortifications around who the customer of education is. We have to be a little bit more flexible with that. Students have become one of the customers that some institutions have hung their hats on, but it doesn't quite work when you look at it from a service quality perspective, right? But if you consider all your customers, like future employees, the actual institution you're working in, and for me, my big one is actually society. All right, if we think about it that way, it all just kind of falls together when you go backward. So what we tried to highlight here is in our thought processes using a quality tool like a CPOC diagram is where do learning resources come into play? And you'll notice they come into play in 4 of the 5 areas. But it's also recognizing how they come into play and how we integrate them into our process design, not whether they come first or they come last. It's a little bit more of a iterative process than that. And what happens as well in quality, once we've brainstormed this all out, the funny one is I was going to bring, and I forgot, I have my mechanical engineering students do this, and I'm like, do a CPOC on your program. It's kind of hysterical, really, because they actually bring up things you wouldn't even expect. And then I force them to take some of the silly stuff like, oh, I need my 5 cups of coffee in the morning to succeed in my program. But then we have to get into what's called KPIVs and KPOVs, because in the quality and stats world, you have to have things that you can actually measure, collect data on, analyze, etc. I'm not going to say necessarily quantitative, because we can have a qualitative analysis as well. So these are what we call key process input variables and key process output variables. So we have to get that detailed. So what we tried to do, Kathryn and I did, was take some, again, literature, experience, and whatnot, and I used some of my student stuff from mechanical. Where does the word resource, or where do the words like textbook come up to play when I identify these key process input variables and key process output variables? In quality and industry, these would be what we call the critical to quality variables. What can we measure, and how do we tie that to our customer expectations? So the output variables are the ones that are downstream, closer to what the customer is going to experience, and closer to basically those elements of their experience or their product in terms of how we define quality, all right? And the definition of quality comes in many different ways. Do we still have that slide open, or no? So one of the things I want you to think about too, when we talk about talk about output variables and quality is there are dimensions of it. And one of the activities I give my students is to pull a pen out. And I ask them to think about what makes a good pen. And this is a board activity. We fill the board with just words, you know, from the fact that it has to flow right, or it has to be the right color, or it has to feel nice on my finger, or it has to sit here, it has to have a ballpoint, it has to have a clicker, it has to have a blah, 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 blah. So, and then we separate all that into the dimensions of quality. At the end of the day, I'm not going to go into those, but those dimensions of quality include things like empathy, they include things like credibility, they include things like reliability. We have to define those. And then once we define those, then we can define those output variables as well. How do we, and then here comes the analysis part. So we're in that analysis phase where we're brainstorming, organizing, and collecting, but then we have to really get down to figuring out where do the resources, because we're focused on resources today, but you can imagine we're only highlighting all the other variables that go into course design. I just don't think we give ourselves the time to do that, all right, to really, really look at it. I'm thinking, and I'm going to put this over to Charles, I think folks like in the publishing world probably do, all right, because that's what their job is. But as an educator, I have absolutely no time and no spread for that. So what you're seeing up here is what's called a part of what's called quality function deployment. And companies spend a lot of money and time taking what those dimensions of quality are, what the output variables are that their customers say they want, those outcomes, and then they try to map those to what the inputs are in terms of designing the process. And you map that relationship together, and you try to identify what parts of your process tie directly or indirectly, or maybe minorly, or maybe not even all, to the requirements that your customers are saying they need. And it is an eye-opener experience. And when it comes to something like the choice of resources, which we actually don't even have anything because we didn't have the time to sit and fill this all out. But the idea is to map those requirements for learning resources to all of the elements. And I've only picked one element of outputs, which is the performance. Does the course or program do what we've stated it's supposed to do? And what we've got there now is what comes from the GAISE, the outline there for statistics, education, outcomes. And so we're only partially completing this matrix. In industry, if you were developing a service like a bank service or a financial service, these matrices are huge, they're deep, and they're informative. And I just think that in our world, we have used them over and over again over the last few years, and we feel that we have come up with some good quality products. Lots of things to learn, lots of handcuffing in terms of what our program require, what our programs require, because we're service, what our institution holds us back from, what other colleagues hold us back from, what our program customers don't understand that we're trying to do. There's a lot of things there. But positively, this gives us an analysis outcome that we can put on a table to start a conversation. All right, and that's all. So I guess am I on time? Oh, excellent. All right, thank you.